we are recording. So, today, Ange, we're talking about intuitive eating.
I love this topic.
Do you love this topic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really do.
It's interesting for sure.
Exactly.
It's an interesting concept. It's an interesting theory. And we get asked the questions a lot. So, like, for those who don't know, we've tracked our food, on and off for a long. We've certainly forayed into calorie counting and macro counting many times over the years, but like have been really, I'd say, just
dialed in for
the last 2+ years.
Yeah, definitely since 2015 for me.
For Angie, yeah.
I remember. I'm really dialed in.
So Angie's, yeah, that's right. You've been doing it longer. I forgot that I still didn't want to give up my my childish ways.
Well, I saw there was a Greek goddess program out there, and all
Grego Gallagher's program,
right? And I tracked my food, and I got unbelievable results. Well,
it's funny, like it's funny because you did that Grego Gallagher program, and I actually did the same. The guy version one, right?
Yep. Warrior Shred.
Warrior
We
Shred.
started, yeah.
Uh-huh.
We actually both started with Warrior Shred.
Mm-hmm. And so that was cool. So that was counting macros, and that was awesome. And so I did that for a while, and it just kind of gave me an idea of what to do, and then I got bored with it. Even though it did work wonders, and I felt awesome. But as far as intuitive eating go, that window of tracking, that was what, 2015, and doing it for a year. I don't know. I might not have even done it that long, but it just gave me an idea of where my calories should be to lose weight, to be lean. And I just frankly was lazy. Well, if we're being real honest, at that point, the pain of having to lose fat wasn't acute enough for me.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like at that point, like my younger-ish metabolism was still kicking in. I was still, when I say go hard at the gym, I'm talking about owning the gym and training on the floor 10 hours a day. So I didn't track steps back then.
Like your activity level was high.
My activity level was extremely high. I track my steps now. And so just being at the gym doing my 1 hour just normal physique weightlifting workout is about 5,000 steps.
Yeah.
So I did that for 10 hours a day. You know what I mean? So certainly not manual labor, but a really high step count. And so I was able to stay lean and not have to measure that much.
Right. You could still have a few beers every single night and wind down and still see your physique, abs, and I think I was a little bit different, right? Because at that time I was still, I think, teaching, right? So school teacher, not teaching on like fitness, but it was the first program I had actually done where I did measure and weigh my food and use an app to kind of see where I was at. Or I had done the Special K diet, I had done paleo, I even did those diet pills back in the day. I know if you're a female and watching, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And I never saw results like that. And I could see my abs, and I only trained 3 to 4 times a week. I wasn't really even into weightlifting yet. Well, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I was weightlifting, but I wasn't
not physique training.
I wasn't physique training, right? And so for me, I kept tightening up the reins and using a tool like MyFitnessPal because I could have that body and still eat things that I really liked. So,
yeah. And so that, I mean...
So I intuitively wasn't ready to go off on my own.
Right. And, my intuition was, and we're going to talk about this, was incorrect.
Yeah.
Right? My intuition was built off of a 19-year-old mindset of like, I'm trying to get bigger, so I need protein, and so I have to eat everything because I lifted, so I got to give my body the fuel to like build the muscles. And that was a construct built when I was 19. And we'll talk about correlation is not causation. And that distorted belief was carrying over into my 30s. But really, it's not that my eating was enough to keep me lean. It was that my activity level was so high to keep me lean. I didn't understand the difference. And then as the gym grew, when we hired a staff and like all this stuff, the lack of activity compounded with now a really shitty diet, compounded with a bunch of stress that made a shitty diet even worse, led to the point where the pain was bad enough for me. I'm like, dang, I look like a dude who used to work out, and I feel like I'm 60, not 30, or I guess I was 35 at the time.
Right.
And so that was that acute pain that led me to say, I need a serious intervention with my nutrition, with for my health. And so I started that way, and then once I really worked, through that framework and shifted my mindset from like, this is an external force being imposed on me, to like, this is what I want to do to better myself. Then it's like, well, why wouldn't I?
Right.
And so I guess.
Do you want to start off with? I mean, that's kind of like the backstory. But
that's the backstory.
Do you want to start off with what intuition means?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. So we'll just take it from the top. So we did a call today. We did a support call for our clients, which we do every Saturday morning, where we address topics like these on a live call. And I didn't hit record, but either way, we're just going to do it as a podcast now. So,
right.
And so I've got sort of a framework of a conversation to work through, and we'll just kind of interject where you need to. But let's take it from the top. What does intuitive even mean? And the definition of intuitive is using or based on what one feels to be true, even without conscious reasoning.
What feels to be true.
What feels to be true, even without conscious reasoning. And so the example I use with our clients today is, in a very heated political climate right now, our feelings can be deceiving because there's all these kind of clickbait propaganda type titles, for us to click on, that are meant to enrage you, that are meant to evoke a feeling, and they don't evoke a rational response. They don't evoke reasoning, but the titles alone are enough to outrage you. And then if you don't read the story, you never see that, like, oh, it's just business, it's just politics, right? But you can get really enraged by this. And that, I mean, I think that's just a good sense. Your intuition is serving you wrong, right? In those instances when you allow the clickbait to outrage you, and your intuition can serve you wrong, certainly with food as well. Or not even your intuition, but like your feelings can serve you. Like, feelings come and go, and they can definitely lead you astray if you let them steer the ship entirely. I feel like feelings should be balanced with reason.
Right.
Yeah. In vice versa too, right? Like, if you're all logic and no feeling, then you're not a human, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, feeling is a part of being alive. So it's not that feelings have no place in life, but when you're trying to get a specific result, especially,
it's recognizing and being aware of them, and whether it's bringing you closer to your goal or further away.
Exactly. So I mean, I guess that being said, is all of our intuitions are going to be shaped by our experiences. In our experiences, we're always accumulating more experiences. Therefore, our experiences are always changing. Therefore, our intuitions are always changing. Our instincts are always changing. And so the problem with that is, as we accumulate these experiences, they can become distorted stories in our head. And there's the correlation and causation problem, which is it can be very hard to separate out correlation and causation. And so what I mean by that is, taking paleo, for example, you could cut out grains, right? You could cut out grains from your diet because paleo says they're bad. And you could lose a bunch of weight initially because you've just, maybe that was a food group that was like 25-30% of your calories, and you just stopped eating that food group altogether. You might lose some weight initially. So you correlate. There's a correlation between your weight loss and removing grains, but it's not the causation. The causation is just the calories, right?
Right.
So now you're living the grain-free life, right? Just judging everybody, preaching it.
Which we have done. That's why Paul is saying it. We have been there.
But you're living the grain-free life.
Learned experience.
And you get a paleo cookbook with paleo desserts in it, and you start making.
Like, remember that paleo pumpkin pie I used to make? It had
Vaguely.
the nut coconut oil crust, and then the coconut milk pumpkin filling
right.
with all the raw honey.
Perfect example, right? So she starts making this paleo dessert with the ingredients you just mentioned.
Right, I'm nailing it. I'm
coconut
so
flour,
healthy.
coconut oil, this, that, the other thing. And, a slice of that bad boy is probably 450, 500 calories, something like that. So you might then logically, gain weight because now you're just 2 slices of pumpkin pie. Paleo pumpkin pie a day is 1,000 calories. Now you get fat. And, wouldn't you know, pumpkin makes me fat. I added pumpkin into my diet and I got fat. Well, of course not. The causation is the increase in calories, but you're correlating it incorrectly. And so that's an example of a distorted story in your head that's shaped by your experiences if you don't have the reasoning to balance it out, to kind of look at the big picture and see like what is really what's all the factors, right? So I guess the biggest question is balancing those feelings with the reasoning is, just understanding, do your feelings, does your intuition line up with your result?
Right.
And that's the question to ask. And then if you can answer that or find your balance in that, you're going to be good, because short-term feelings can be misleading. Short term, I want a donut right now, right? It's Saturday morning. I've got my coffee here. It's cold and rainy out. Like, man, that would make me feel good, right? But that's not aligned with my long-term goal, right? That would, donut's 300 calories, but obviously I'd have like 5 of them. And that would be like all, because they're good. And then I wouldn't be able to stop eating for the rest of the day. Or, and then I would blow all my calories. And then I'd be like, shit, well, that was not in line with that nutrition plan for that day.
Yes.
That feeling misled me away from like sort of the bigger result that I was chasing, right? So that's an example of like, I should have that, it feels right. It's a cold day, I should have some comfort food. Or I'm sad or I'm stressed, so I should have some comfort food.
I had a shitty day at work.
I had a shitty day at work. I should have a drink, or I should have, whatever. And on the flip side of that, you can also, your short-term feelings can be misleading, where it's like, I can't have that, it's bad. Or it's not even short, whereas a quote-unquote bad food doesn't necessarily have to be out of line with your results. So I guess going back to the donuts, I could indeed build my entire day around having a donut, right? Like, and I could work it in, and I could, the donut itself isn't inherently bad.
Right.
Right. But feeling like it's bad is kind of misleading, because it's not, it just is. It's a delicious high-calorie thing that's going to take up calories that are going to leave me less hungry. But that's my decision to make.
Yeah, and you can flip it the other way. A quote-unquote good food, like everyone, avocado is a hot food item. And just going back to paleo, people think because it's avocado and it's a quote-unquote good food for you, right? Like, I'm doing good. I can have more of that because that's good for me, right? Like that feeling of doesn't have a bad stigma. That's not a villain food. That's a good food. And then they start eating all this avocado, and it's going into their salad. It's smashed on their toast. It's showing up in their omelet. And all of a sudden they're still gaining weight, right? But they don't understand, well, that's a really high calorie food, right? You subbed maybe some lower calorie foods like proteins and carbs for these fats that are quote unquote good for us, but you ate it because it's good, and now you're wondering why your body is changing. Not for the best sometimes.
Exactly. And so I guess the next kind of point is your physiology doesn't have feelings.
Yes.
It just is. It doesn't know. It doesn't know if you ate a donut. It doesn't know if you ate nothing but salmon and kale, right? All it knows is that there's this much energy coming in and this much energy going out, and the balance gets stored as fat, more or less. Right?
You used that great example this morning too about the restaurant, right?
I don't even remember.
Oh, Paul, it was so good when you were talking about physiologically, right? Like you were like, they don't know you got the salmon and the kale for your dinner, and then you had the tiramisu.
Yeah. Okay, that's for sure. That's later on.
Okay, it was so good. I'm like, don't miss it.
That's moral licensing. We'll talk about that later. That's another big reason to mistrust your feelings around food is moral licensing. But yeah, we'll talk about that later. More what I mean when physiology doesn't have feelings is just like, it doesn't care if the food's good or bad or whatever. Like it just is, right? And so if you're looking to create some sort of physiological effect in your body, which you are, like you're trying to lose weight. So the big ones are lose weight, lose fat specifically, or like change the way you feel energetically and have, and improved health, right? So if you're trying to lose weight, it just comes down to calories. Eat fewer calories than you burn. And like period. That's the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter if it was a donut or a Twinkie.
Right.
Like literally, this study's been done where people eat nothing but McDonald's or nothing but Twinkies or whatever within an appropriate calorie range, and they lose weight. They also improve their markers of health too. If you're looking to do fat loss, so you want most of that weight that you lose to come from fat, you want to retain as much muscle as possible, it's calories and adequate protein, period, right? And then if it's something else like health and energy and all that stuff, you have to take into effect like, your digestion, like blood sugar levels, all that stuff. So yes, maybe you want to make sure that most of your carbs are from low GI sources. You want to make sure you get enough micronutrient dense
Right.
food. You know what I mean? But like these are specific results that have nothing to do with good or bad, right? And they have nothing to do with your intuition. You know, you could do Twinkies and multivitamins, and it's more or less the same from a physiological standpoint as much kale, right? Like it just is,
Right.
if they're matched for calories, right? So the point is, there's no good or bad. You just match your behaviors to your desired result. You know?
Yeah.
And there's no judgment on it, and there should be nothing else around that. And so the only way to know if your behaviors line up with your desired result is you got to determine, am I on track?
And that has to be measured.
And that
somehow.
has to be measured.
Right.
It absolutely has to be measured. It's the only way to know. And the more accurately you track your data, the more precise you can be with what you expect the result to be. The more precise, the more close your result is going to be to what you want. The clearer the picture, right? People want clarity. And so, I mean, tracking is accepted in every other area of life. You know, we don't go to the bank for business loans and say, I feel like I've got this really good idea. And they say, well, Paul, you're losing money on it. Why would we give you $500,000? Right? And I'm like, no, I feel it. Like,
right.
I feel good about this one. Like, they're just not going to give me the money, right? They're going to be like, well, okay, that's great, but according to your business metrics, you're losing money. This is a risky loan, right? They're just not going to dish that out. In your home finances, if you want to save money, I hope you're tracking how much money you make and how much money you spend, right?
Yeah.
You can't just be like, I feel like I did good this month. I'm going to go buy a Porsche, right? Like, what if you don't have an extra $90,000? You know what I mean? There's only one way to determine that.
And I feel like a female one that they'll understand too is if you're trying to get pregnant, you're going to track your cycle, right? You don't just intuitively know when you could be ovulating. If maybe you know like a year down the road because you've tracked it for so long and you understand those symptoms that your body goes through, but you've done some type of measuring and figuring out when is this time the right time. Like, it's one that always sticks back in my head. I'm like, I don't just go into that willy-nilly. I have no idea. Like,
right. Well, in any area of your life, I mean, you could even take that like one step further to like the IVF that we did, right? You were monitored, like they drew blood daily, right?
I was
to
there
see what
every
your levels
morning
were at.
you
know,
so it was ultrasounds every other day.
Why? Because that was a very specific result we were looking for.
And
right? Super specific result. We're investing a lot into it, spending a lot of money on it.
Yep.
Like, what would you say if the doctor was like, well, just come back when you feel like you're ovulating?
Like we're ready to go ahead and do an egg retrieval.
I'd be like, man, I don't know if you're worth 5 figures.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
you needed it that detailed. We needed it that measured.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So the point is, though, when we talk about intuitive eating, it really just is another form of tracking, right? The question is more like, how are you tracking? And that's what it comes down to. And so, are you tracking in your head? This is about the right amount of food, right? Or are you getting out your food scale and measuring it and putting it in MyFitnessPal? Are you doing the hand portions that like Precision Nutrition advocates? Like a serving of protein is like 1 palm, right? And then you have X amount of servings of protein a day. Regardless of how you track, you're still tracking. And even when you're quote unquote eating intuitively, unless you're completely detached from the result of how you look and feel in your health, unless you're literally like, I don't give a shit about any of that.
I'm just great with whatever shows up.
Then you're tracking, because you're tracking. Oh,
my pants feel tighter.
Exactly, my pants feel tighter.
I look different in the mirror.
Oh, you took that picture of me. That's what my face looks like, huh?
Yep.
Right, like you track these. I mean,
you're tracking with your eyeballs a lot.
You're tracking that result, right?
Yeah.
And then you're tracking if you're not happy with that result. Usually, in this day and age, you're not happy on being on the too big side, right? Then you're somehow trying to track your food to reduce the amount that you take in, right? And if you rely on your feelings to do that, you're just not going to have as good of a result as if you're actually tracking the food appropriately. And your life is going to suck because you're not going to be able to have the things you want You know what I mean? You're going to automatically start labeling stuff good and bad. And that's the only way you have, it's all fuzzy.
Right.
You don't have any clarity around what exactly you need to eat in order to lose weight. So the point is, no matter what you're tracking, but it's your sweet spot that determines how diligently you track. And so your sweet spot is basically the work you're willing to put in for the result you're looking for.
Right.
And so I like to use extreme ends of the spectrum here, but like if you're looking to be 8% body fat, you have to track extremely diligently for a long period of time, right? Like there's just no way you can't intuitively eat yourself to 8% body fat and have abs and just be super lean and feel great. Like you just cannot do it. Now that being said, not everybody wants to be 8% body fat, right? So could you maintain? And this is whatever. These numbers I'm using are for guys. Women, it might look a little different, but I think you get the point. Super shredded is a very specific.
Getting ready to stand up on that stage at a bikini or a physique competition. Like you are very diligent about how much food you're consuming.
Right. And now, so that being said, not everybody wants that. So their sweet spot isn't there, right? They're like, hey, you know what? I don't have to be that shredded. I don't want to be. I'm happier over here.
And I feel like that's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
Right? Like I could be super, super shredded. Like I've had people ask me multiple times, why don't you do a bikini competition? But I'm not ready to be that diligent. Like there are days where like I do, track my macros, right? I do put things in my fitness pal. I use the food scale, but there are days where I just want more food, right? And I decide that. So I'm happy kind of being in that middle.
Your sweet spot is, I know that this is like, I know how this is going to affect my weight in my body fat stores.
Yep.
Which, by the way, is minimal if it's just one day, right? But like also, it's going to make me super happy to have this food right now. Like I'm hungry.
Right.
And that's your sweet spot, and that's totally okay. And finding that is going to determine your course of action, right? But I guess the biggest thing for me, why I love tracking so much, is it just gives me clarity.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It just, at the end of the day, there's no more guesswork. And I think a lot of the lack of clarity it comes from when people try to judge things by feelings, and then feelings turn into morality, right? So this food is good, this food is naughty. I'm a good person when I eat good food. I'm a bad person when I eat bad food. And I think that is a super unhealthy way of doing it. And that's not only is it a shitty way of tracking, it's not necessarily even going to give you the best result, but it's just not good for your mental and emotional and psychological health. Lack of clarity in everything, lack of clarity in relationships, lack of clarity in business is, a detriment no matter what it is. Getting clear on expectations is really important. So sometimes, when we talk about our feelings kind of leading us awry, it's what happens is, I kind of lost my train of thought. I forgot what that slide was. So if you guys are just listening, I'm going through the slideshow I did earlier, but since we're having a conversation, I forgot what that slide was. Let's just get into moral licensing. All right. So moral licensing, we already kind of alluded to it, is assigning a good or a bad label to a food.
Right.
Right. So it's and moral licensing is a much bigger thing than that, psychological effect than that. But it's like, hey, this food is good because it's labeled organic, it's labeled gluten free, it's labeled low fat, it's labeled no sugar added, and so you feel good about eating it. And what that does, that gives you license to do something that you consider bad. Great example, I love it, Whole Foods and their pizza. It's an organic pizza. Right? What's not to love?
Right.
Have half of it, 1,600 calories, right? But it's organic. And so what you're saying, so what it's doing is like the organic label is canceling out the fact that it's a very high calorie food. And if you don't have any conscious.
Honestly, I was that person for a while that I was like, I'll do a gluten-free Oreo because that's good for me.
Right.
Not realizing it's the same amount of calories as a regular Oreo, maybe more. But
and so it's like
embarrassing.
If you don't have the clarity around tracking macros and calories and all that stuff, you're just like, hey, this pizza must be good for me. A, I bought it at Whole Foods. B, it's got a sticker on it that says organic. Like, I'm sure it's fine. And if you're not clear about the result you're trying to get, and you're not clear about how to track your progress towards that result, you're just going to end up super duper frustrated.
Right.
You know, and so then the other take on moral licensing is like, you go out to a restaurant, and this is the one you want to talk about earlier. Like, I was good for dinner, right? Like, I had salmon and I had salad for dinner. I was quote unquote good, right? And then when the dessert menu comes, now I have license to be bad, right? Because I passed up on the cheeseburger for dinner. That makes me good. Now I can balance that out. I have permission to be bad. And that tiramisu is going to be loaded with calories. I mean, especially, if you get a slice of cake from Gibson's, right? I mean, obviously nobody's, if you guys don't know what Gibson's is, it's a steakhouse. The slices of cake are like, I don't even know, the size of my head.
It's like a quarter of a full 9-inch size cake.
So, like, whatever. The point is,
it's calories for maybe 2 days for me if I eat the whole piece.
And of course, nobody's going to eat the whole thing
which
themselves.
I'd like to try.
But you get the point, right? Where it's like, just if you feel like you can balance out the good with the bad, which is subconscious, we all do it, by the way, in various aspects of our lives. You're just going to end up overeating if you're not clear on what the result is that you want to get from your nutrition, and if you're not clear of how to track your progress towards that result. You're going to be like, oh man, I had a bunch of cake, but who cares? It's cool because I had the chicken for dinner.
Right.
And again, frustration that comes from lack of clarity. You know, and your feelings led you that way, right? Your feelings of morality, your feelings of being good by having the chicken when everybody else got the ribeye. Oh, they're bad. I'm good. I'm getting the chicken. Now the dessert comes, I can be a little bit bad. It sounds really silly, probably, especially coming from a man's mouth. But I'm trying to do that on purpose to drive the point home. But I think you guys all know that, right? Like you can look at other areas of your life. Like some of the other specific studies were, people were less likely to donate money if they already had. It was like some study, man, I'm going to totally butcher it, but they had done some very minor act of charity, like some very minor thing that like in their head was labeled good. And then they were less likely to donate money when asked to, like an hour later or something like that. Like that's moral licensing.
Yes.
And yeah, whatever. That could be a whole other thing, right? So just to pull it back around, when people ask us about intuitive eating, when people ask us about intuitive eating, they're like, well, there's these, people on social media who espouse it, and they're maintaining, they have these great bodies and they're doing intuitive eating. It's really just someone who weighed and measured their food for a really long time. And therefore their intuition is shaped around it, right? Their intuition is shaped around the knowledge of how many calories are in everything. And
they're probably calculating in their head.
They're calculating in their head.
Serving their food. Yep. And
they have a looser outcome that they're looking for probably than they did initially. Meaning like a lot of it's like former bodybuilders and former physique competitors, right? Who for years and years and years tracked very, very diligently to be shredded for these shows, right? And then they kind of rebel against it. They're like, screw that, that was too much. And now I just eat intuitively. But
they have such a base knowledge to know which foods actually
right,
respond well with their body, and which ones, what portion sizes they need of those foods.
Exactly.
And how they're going to show up on their body. Like, they're not walking around with a six-pack
right,
just eating intuitively. Like, they're...
So, exactly. So, their intuition is actually a form of still tracking in their head.
Yes.
Based on knowledge they had previously. And then the result they're looking for is looser because they're no longer doing shows or whatever. So if you go from 8% body fat to maintaining 12, you're still going to look really good, but you don't have to be as diligent. So they're still tracking in their head. They're looking for less of a specific result, and they're still tracking their outcome based on how they look and feel.
And they're still eating foods they probably ate before, right? They're not just all of a sudden intuitively eating pizza and cake all day long, right? They have a good base of knowledge of what foods are most important in their diet and which ones make them show up and feel the best. So
yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, if their expectation is, I want to maintain, between this weight and that weight, well, they're still tracking their result, right? And they're still tracking their food in their head. And if they get too close to the top end of the weight, they're going to start in their head tracking less food in order to get back down towards the middle, right?
Yeah.
And so it's still tracking. It's just what's the result you want is in what you're willing to put in to get that result is going to determine what method of tracking you use.
Right.
But the bottom line is that what data allows you to do is it removes all morality and it removes feelings, especially negative feelings, out of the equation because you have clarity. If you like donuts, like God bless you, you can have donuts. But you're going to know how they fit into the overall picture. You're going to know, oh, hey, that's pretty high calories. It's going to take up a big chunk of my day. I need to plan accordingly, right?
Right.
Which for me is kind of like why I don't do them as much anymore. Or like going back to pizza, I love pizza too. I'm just like, man, well, actually pizza's more because it makes me feel crappy. But I'm like, man, I love donuts. But like, I just know that I'd rather eat more food. I know I'm a quantity over quality guy.
Me too.
I would rather just eat a ton of food. So I know that donut's not going to keep me full. But not everybody's like that. Right? Some people love the sensory experience of like whatever, a really good dessert and this and that. I'm like, give me a like on a scale of 10, give me a 5 in a flavor profile. But if it's like moderate to low calorie and I can have a ton of it, like I'm in. That's what I want.
Well, I just looked. I love those pumpkin scones from Starbucks. I didn't realize they were 500 calories. And I just, the season pops up. I'm going to eat it.
Right,
That's what my feelings tell me to. It's fall. I need to have it. And so then I went and looked and I found like a Weight Watchers recipe that's a pumpkin cheesecake made of Greek yogurt where I'm still going to get a really nice pumpkin flavor. It's still going to be sweet, which is really what I'm looking for. And I'm looking it to match that cozy feeling I want for the fall. And it's 100 calories for a quarter of an 8-serving pie. So I could have like 5 pieces of that pie to equal that one tiny little scone. So yeah, it's just kind of being aware and knowing stuff. Like, but my feelings told me in the moment that I should really have it. And then I'm like you, I want quantity over a lot of things. But it's because we've tracked and measured, and now we can intuitively make those decisions.
It gives you clarity, right?
Yeah.
Like I know how many calories I'm trying to hit. And I guess like going back to feelings too. Like we most people would be like, man, cheeseburgers are bad, right? And generally speaking,
they're pretty good.
Well,
I know,
yeah,
bad. Like if you eat it feeling bad,
but like generally speaking, like for your weight loss, you go to a bar or whatever, a dive bar, and you get a cheeseburger, and it's going to be delicious. It's going to be X amount of calories, and it's a lot, right? Because they use the fattier ground beef to make it juicier, big brioche bun, ton of cheese, ton of sauce, fries on the side, the whole deal, right? And yes, that's a delicious experience, but that's like, that whole thing plus a couple beers, you're looking at like probably 1,500 calories. Because from, I could probably drink 3 beers.
And that might be honestly on the low end.
Right, yeah, it might be on the low end, right?
Yeah.
And so, dang, that sucks. So can I just never have cheeseburgers again? Well, it's like, no, I actually really enjoy cheeseburgers. So all we do is I get leaner ground beef. So the Jewel by our house sells 96.4. Healthy Life buns are 80 calories a bun. Sargento cheese, you can get the thin slice if you want. It's 45 calories a slice. And so now I can have 3 of those.
And no sugar added ketchup from Heinz. Like, it's great.
And so now I can have 3 of those for dinner. I'm completely satiated. Is it as good as
Red Robin?
Like, no, of course not.
Their burgers are good.
Of course not. But like, I get to make the substitution. I get to have something that I enjoy. It scratches that itch. I get to have it in a quantity that actually I feel full. And I get to keep going with my fat loss. Like, I get to stay on track, which is like the best.
And I
wouldn't have that without clarity.
Yeah, and I think for us, the reason that we continue to track, and if people ask me, like, I'm gonna probably track the rest of my life. Like, it works for me. It's not overwhelming. Like, I'd much rather just kind of stay in line with how I want to look and feel. But if I have goals to lose fat, or I have goals to build muscle, or whatever it is, I want to make the most out of it. And so with a little bit more measuring, just like we do with our bank account or anything else, it takes one extra step that I'm used to anyway to get there faster. That works for me. But if you're listening and you feel like, no, like I've got a good handle on it, like I'm happy in this situation and where I'm at in my body and in my health, then you're still going to go off some type of measurement, but it's based off how you feel and what you want out of it. But for me, I'll tighten up the reins to always kind of be where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy the way I feel physically, like both with how I look physically and how I feel physically, like energetically.
Physically.
And everything I do, it's always better when you can balance the reason with the feeling.
Right.
Right. I think is it, and that's balancing reason and feeling is going to come from having clarity, and then you can just make really sound judgments about like, is it for you, or what's right for you. And I guess that I think that's actually the note we ended the call on, because Catherine had a good comment about, you know,
sweet spot.
about, she was like, man, I never even thought about how my sweet spot can adjust over time. I'm like, yeah, I mean, what you put into your nutrition plan, how stringent and diligent you want to be leading into a vacation is, you know, like a beach vacation, let's just say, is going to be different than your sweet spot when you're on that vacation.
Right.
Like these are different things. And so I guess the point is that what clarity allows you to do is actually take personal responsibility. So when you know the numbers and you know how, and you have the tools, you know how to track for yourself in such a way that affects the outcomes that you desire, then, you know, now you're finally at you've arrived at personal responsibility. And so many times, you know, certainly in the diet industry, certainly in the fitness industry, but, you know, in every industry, there's this appeal to authority, right? Where we're like, we just want people, like, somebody just tell me what to do. Am I doing it right? Can you just tell me how to do it the right way? And what that's doing is transferring agency to somebody else.
Yeah.
And saying like, hey, somebody else knows what's best for me. And don't get me wrong, listen to experts, but then take that information and how you apply it to your own life is absolutely a personal choice. You know, and I think that's probably the most important point of this whole thing.
I was just gonna say, you just wrapped it up.
Yeah,
that was a great way to end it. Like,
so, you know, it's taking personal responsibility for your health is then going to help you take responsibility for every other area in your life, and it's a really good feeling to not have to like seek out, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? It's like, no, it's just find information, apply it to your life, and make the decision based on what you want for your life. Because at the end of the day, you're the only one who can decide like what that outcome is that you want. So that's it. So, you know, if you guys out there, if you're looking for help to get the tools you need to get this clarity so that you can begin to take action and start changing the outcomes you want for your health, you should check out our 12-week anti-diet course. It's antidiet.co. So antidiet, ANTIDIET.co. The 12-week course we have, it gives you all the tools you need to get off the diet roller coaster, to build the you plan, to understand what works for you in your life, and so that you can apply it in any way you want. So you can, you know, build the body you want and sustain those results indefinitely without some crash diets, without crazy unsustainable workouts, just good sound principles and giving you the tools you need. So that's antidiet.co. Any other parting words, Angie?
Not at all.
All right, good.